I am Brooks Barrett, the Minister for Environmental Justice for the United Church of Christ. Welcome to this edition of our Creation Justice webinar, the webinar that connects faith to some of the most pressing concerns that our world faces today. As always, I am joined by the Reverend Michael Malcolm of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light and the People's Justice Council. Today, we are not just talking about the problems of the world, we are talking about how congregations can get involved in the practical solutions afforded by solar power. Our featured guest, Anya Schoolman, has been a trailblazer when it comes to a community-oriented approach to solar. We'll introduce her more fully in a second. Michael, would you get us started with a theological framing for today's conversation?
Yeah, thank you, Brooks. Thank you, Anya, for being with us. Thank you all for being with us. I want to talk about regenerative relationship. We put a lot of focus on sustainability, and I think sustainability is excellent to put focus on. However, sustainability means that we maintain the things the way that they are, but not actually improving. I think that we need to go a step further and start really talking about being regenerative in our relationship, not only with the world, but with one another. In fact, I can put scripture on it that says, give and it will be given back to you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will men given to your bosom. I think that that first part is extremely important. It's the giving back and the giving. That's a relationship that describes a relationship where there's not just a take. It's not an extractive relationship, nor is it a relationship based on sustaining what is, but it's a relationship based on continuous improvement. It's a relationship based on a perpetual caring for. And I think that's where we are. I think that's what God calls us to be, or Creator calls us to be. In relationships, not only with one another, but with the planet as well. Those relationships should be relationships that are regenerative, meaning that they're forever growing, forever bonding, forever being replenished. That is my theological reflection as we get ready to talk about solar power. And I'll talk about my challenge after we're finished with this conversation.
All right. Thank you, Michael, as always, for that stimulating reflection as we get started. I now want to introduce Anya. I want to say a couple of things in introducing her. First, one thing that I really appreciate is how Solar United Neighbors got started. And it got started when her son Walter asked, "Mom, can we go solar?" And that set in motion many things, which ultimately led to this pioneering work that her organization has done in bringing solar co-ops throughout the country. And I also want to say that I personally have had a chance to experience the work of her organization. I came to know it because I live in the Cleveland area of Ohio, and our county, Cuyahoga County, has partnered with Anya's organization to create solar co-ops on more than one occasion. And so I've attended a couple of the introductory sessions. And I'll admit, you know, I tend to come to things with a skeptical mind sometimes, but I was immediately won over by the presentations and became a believer in what Solar United Neighbors has to offer. And I believe they have something special to offer to those of us in faith communities who want to engage solar power and not just bring it to our churches, but also bring it to our surrounding communities. So delighted to have you with us, Anya. I will turn things over to you so we can learn and from you and be blessed by all that you have to offer.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you here today. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to just talk for a little while, a short intro, couple of sort of my key lessons learned from taking people, many thousands of people solar and thousands of organizations solar at this point. So we have a lot of time for questions and discussion before we end. But one of the things I just wanted to say in terms of an intro is that it wasn't just that my son and his neighbor and best friend Diego had gone and they'd seen the movie Inconvenient Truth and they got inspired to ask, what can we do about it? But also my son was working on finding a subject for his year-long social action project for Tikkun Olam for his bar mitzvah. And so it was really also our rabbi and our congregation that brought us into making a really deeper commitment to not just asking that question, but actually working to find the answer. And we tried to go solar on our own back then. This is 2007. And it was very, like today, it was very confusing. Unlike today, it was also very, very expensive. That's the biggest thing that's changed. And I had sort of despaired a little bit when we first researched it. And I said to my son and to Diego, who were, as I said, the key thing to remember is they were 12. And I said to them, I think in order to be successful, we're going to need to bring in the whole neighborhood because it's too expensive to do it by ourselves and it's too much work just for one house. And so they really came up with the idea of the Mount Pleasant Solar Cooperative, which was our first bulk purchase buying group. And they created a little handmade flyer and they asked people, how much energy do you use each month? Put it in a little box. They made 12 little boxes. And, would you go solar if you could save money or at least pay as much as you're paying today, no more, and give us your address. And so that was all. And we started going door to door. Well, my neighborhood is an urban neighborhood in Washington, D.C. with attached row houses. And after I went up the first 3 flights of stairs, I was basically done. And the only reason that this project was a success is that it was being led by 2 12-year-old boys who were not daunted by running up 2 flights of steps to the front door of every house in our neighborhood. And so run they did. And I walked along on the sidewalk with them, but really in the background. And 2 weeks later, we'd had 50 homes sign up. And it really just started this momentum. And ever since then, I always tell people, people are like, what amazing, work you've done or leadership, whatever. And I always tell people, it really feels like we just fell into a swift moving river and it's just been the community and the excitement of other people that has moved us forward since then. And the first time we did a bulk purchase, it did take us 2 years. We got a whole, we ended up having 90 houses sign up in the neighborhood. We ended up having to do reforms both at our Public Service Commission, which is the state level agency that regulates energy, as well as the utility, as well as at the city government level, because things were not set up. In fact, they were basically set up to make it hard to go solar. We passed legislation. Diego became our chief lobbyist. My son became our chief scientist. He started testing the equipment and the materials. He's become a scientist today. And then all the other neighbors started kicking in. Somebody built a website. There was a lawyer. There was an economist crunching the numbers. We took 45 houses solar as a group. And then after that, we just kept refining what the process, how do we engage with the installers. And so now we've done over 200 of these bulk purchase groups. And along the way, a number of congregations, including my own, asked us to help them go solar. And so we've also done it with congregations, both individually as a group. And I think I have a few key sort of framing ideas for congregations as they're starting to think about where do I start and how do I do this and how do you unwind this and what do you do first and how do I prioritize? And I think the first one is that it's usually easier to start with the homes and the members of the congregation than with the congregational building. And that's because churches and congregations and synagogues tend to have complicated buildings. Some of them are fabulous, and I can walk by any building, you see, you know, a big flat roof facing the sun, and that's not complicated, but many of them have multiple pieces. They've got plans, they're thinking about expanding. Maybe we're gonna put the school there, get rid of the parking lot. There's always so much influx in a congregational community that starting a project like solar with the congregation first can be sort of a recipe for death. And so what I like to encourage people to do is to consider something like what we did, a bulk purchase. And it's something that my organization can help people and coach people with, no matter where in the United States you are. But get a group of homeowners together. If you live in a community where people are in homes, it's different if you're in apartments. It's a whole different set of activities there. But if you're in a community where people are living in individual homes, get the group together, do a bulk purchase process where each person's owning their own system, but you're working on it collectively and learning to collectively, and make that the first step. If that's not possible, think of a small project as the first step. Because what you want to do is get your community with sort of a basic literacy. How does solar voltaics work? What is net metering? Net metering is the policy that lets you offset your usage by your production. And it lets you get fairly compensated, like a rollover credits they used to have with the cell phones when they first started, and you got a certain number of minutes a month, and if you didn't use them all, you got to roll them over to the next month and save them. So you got an extra 10 minutes in January because you stock less in December or something. So net metering is the same principle, but it's not the same in every place. So I can't talk to a national audience and say, this is how net metering works, because every state has different policy, and then every utility has different policy. So you need some of the fundamentals. You need to understand what's solar voltaics, that it makes electricity, that it lasts for 25 years, that it comes with very strong warranties, that you can basically make your own electricity for cheaper than what you're buying it for right now, which is basically true in all of the United States. That what's the net metering policy, and then this thing that is very daunting, which is the tax credit. So there's this great opportunity because there's a federal tax credit, but churches generally are nonprofits and don't pay taxes. So it's nice for the homeowners or the private sector. You do that first. They're going to learn about the tax credit. They're going to take tax credit. They're going to understand the economics. They're going to understand the payback. So that's my first lesson, is try starting with the community first, or if the community doesn't have money or doesn't have individual homes, that's okay. Just pick one house or one project, or maybe the school next to the church, or a women's shelter in your community. Pick one project that's small and doable, and build the common vocabulary about how the equipment works and how the rules work and how the money works before you take on the church. That's my first lesson learned. The second is that what I've seen over and over is that churches, partially sort of pushed by the industry, get very caught up in this issue of not being able to take the 30% tax credit. It's likely to step down to 26% next year as the tax credit. It's a lot of money to leave on the table. So there is a option that's available to some churches called third-party owners. It's got a lot of names, and this is one of the reasons it's confusing. Some people call it leasing. Some people call it third-party ownership. Some people call it a power purchase agreement or a PPA. And then there's all these variations in the model. But all it means is that there may be ways to have someone else, a private company, own your solar for your church so that they can take the tax credit and bring down your prices. That's all it means. And it's legal in some states and not legal in some states. But because it's a third, it's 30% of the value, it's worth figuring out whether you're in a state that allows these power purchase agreements or third-party owners or doesn't allow it. And if you do, if it's a state where you can do it, it takes some extra steps to explore those options. And we helped many years ago, we helped a congregation in Maryland go solar, and they decided that rather than getting a solar company to own their solar, they were going to create an LLC of members of their congregation. And we see many congregations take this on because they want to keep the money in the congregation. And it's an interesting idea. We can talk people through it, explain to you what the steps are. We see that a lot in the nonprofit housing sector, which has the same thing, low-income housing, nonprofit organizations. And in that sector, what they've figured out is they'll create a private company to own the solar on behalf of the nonprofit. But my big takeaway after doing this for years is that it's often not worth the transaction costs. That people get, there's something about solar and all of the ideas we have about community ownership and building and enriching our community and how we could do it and whose money we want invested in our congregation. And people often get so tangled up in all those sort of decisions that they never get to the solar. So I have a recommendation of 2 organizations that have evolved to help churches go solar. And one is called Revolve. It's a nonprofit. And basically they'll own the solar system. And then if the church wants to fundraise for it, they can create like an online fundraising platform to help them pay down the costs. And the other is an organization called Collective Sun, which is a very similar model, except for what they do is they allow the next, like a small group in the congregation to become the primary investors in the system. So what it means is you don't have to reinvent the wheel anymore. When we were doing this 10 years ago, everybody was figuring out all these project models and the economics and everything from scratch. But now, not only are there really reputable companies that will own the system for your church if that's what you want, or there are nonprofits that will do it, or there's crowdfunding operations, like it's pretty much all figured out. And so try not to sort of go back to first principles. And that gets me to my last key lesson, and then I'm gonna open it up for conversation. My last key lesson is beware of analysis paralysis. And what I see often is there's something about solar that gets, people get really excited, and usually a congregation will create a committee of some sort to investigate going solar. And I was once involved in one of these processes with a congregation in Virginia, I think. And at one point there was like 150 people in the room, and they were asking all these questions, and I was answering them, like about the warranties and the equipment and how the electricity is produced and everything. And at one point I just said, I want everybody in here to take a deep breath and just realize solar is a piece of equipment. And if you were buying an HVAC system for your congregation, would there be 150 people here asking how like the air compressor works? It's like in some ways people overanalyze it and overthink about it because it's new feeling. And you just want to make sure that if you're going to take on one of these projects, you just don't let yourselves go too far down this rabbit hole. These are well-established companies with well-established warranties. You can get an operations and maintenance plan, like buying anything else, like buying a car or an air conditioner or a new roof. Yes, you have to do your research, you need to do comparative bids, but don't overthink it. That is my biggest lesson. And often what I tell congregations is, rather than starting with a committee and investigation and all that, start with 3 bids. Just go to the market, Google it, ask 3 companies to come in and get you proposals, and then ask for help understanding the difference of the proposals. And that's something that my organization can easily do for organizations. One of the services we provide is help doing bid comparison with a group of people and helping them understand. Now, I think we're getting a lot of questions in the chat. I'm not sure I see the chat, but I'm wondering what you think. Brooke, should I switch to answering some questions now?
I think that'd be terrific. Michael and I can kind of help read things through so you don't have to toggle back and forth.
Okay.
The first thing is, well, we want to make sure that maybe via email, we're able to share those two organizations' names you provided, Revolve and Collective Sun, is it?
That's right, Revolve and
I tried to Google that, and I thought there looked like there might be more than one Revolve out there. And so we'll make sure after this that we get the correct URLs for those organizations and email it out to everyone. Moving to the next thing, Susanna Tuttle, who is with North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, she says that they are often asked questions about agencies like Arcadia and other carbon offset renewable energy programs. And she's curious if you have thoughts on those options, especially for churches where solar is not possible.
Yeah, so it depends what kind of market you live in. So if you live in a deregulated market where there's competition on energy, all of those markets, whether it's Ohio or Maryland, Massachusetts, you can get a green energy option. And that is basically where they're giving you the regular electricity, but you're buying basically the carbon offsets or the renewable energy credits from renewable energy facilities somewhere. And so it's a green energy offset. It's often in some vertically regulated markets. Those are markets where there's no competition. There's one utility that both produces the energy and sells the energy. An example would be Dominion in Virginia. They also sometimes often offer green energy, you know, whether it's wind or solar or some sort of renewable energy product. And all I can say is it's a nice alternative. It's much less tangible and concrete because you don't always know where those RECs or those credits are coming from, but they are real and they are regulated, at least in the competitive market. There's regulatory oversight. And so I think it's a great option, but probably less of a way to sort of bring your congregation together around taking collective action. And it's more of it's more of like a procurement type option. You know, the buildings committee might say, we're going to do recycled paper, we're going to do recycling in the building, we're going to buy a green energy supply. So it's a sort of a different magnitude. And the only other thing I wanted to say about those options is that the contracts are very complex. So if you really have to do very, very careful due diligence because some of them have escalators or varying prices and can really catch a congregation unawares that they think they're getting, say, cheaper than the utility, right? That's how it's advertised. But then in the fine print, it says, well, if we get another cold snap, the prices may escalate. And so the main thing is, you know, they are regulated, but they're not so well regulated that you don't really need to read the contracts very, very carefully. And in some jurisdictions, there are nonprofits that specialize in guiding entities through the energy procurement process. So depending on where you are, I can help direct people to some of those.
Thank you. Anya, Gregory Dink asked, have you experienced roadblocks to going solar in communities with homeowners associations? And if so, how have you navigated through homeowner association restrictions?
That's a great question. And the answer is we definitely are experiencing that all the time. It depends on the state. So there's a large number of states, including quite a number of conservative states, that have limited homeowner associations' abilities to stop solar. So there's like a solar rights law that says, you know, you can't reasonably block somebody putting solar on their own private property. But in some cases, some states, there's no such law. So we actually have a guidebook, which we can include in the email that goes out, which is what to do with, you know, with when your HOA says no, or so, I can't remember what the title of it is. But we often work with homeowners who are being told no by the HOA, and we have a whole process that sort of starts small from educate your other HOA members, maybe get a whole bunch of your other HOA members to join in, so it becomes not just one person in the HOA going solar, but a group. Go to the board meetings, try to change the rules of the HOA. But then if that doesn't work, it's literally go and pass a solar rights law. That's one of the things we're doing in Indiana right now, is that so many solar homeowners are having problems from the HOAs that that we're trying to pass a law at the state level that protects them. One of the key things, whether it's your historic commission or your neighbors or your HOA, is sharing data about how solar raises the value of your house. Because a lot of people think it's like the old satellite dishes, they're ugly, and then it's gonna lower the property values. That's their main concern. But there's really good research now that's showing significant increases in home value due to solar. And we think that over time, that's gonna be the key to getting the HOAs on the board. But right now, it's a process.
Gotcha.
Anya, we've had a number of questions come in. I think just one probably a good question to tackle early on here is just to give a little more explanation to how the solar co-op process works, or what a bulk purchase means. You know, and I think, you know, for our audience, it's really also important maybe to include in that answer how our values can come into play, right, in the process of determining who you're going to purchase from, and what you'd like to see them offering in that purchase. And so I'll let you tackle that one.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of rushed through that part because I didn't know if people were going to be interested. So we run the bulk purchase process in 10 states plus Washington, D.C. But there are other groups that do them, and you can do it yourself. It's not so hard that you can't do it yourself. And we often coach groups to do it themselves. We, the way the process works with us is basically, first you get a group of homeowners that are interested in solar. And what we do is community info sessions, which I think is what you attended in Cuyahoga County, right? So we go to the library or community center or even somebody's house, put up a screen, and we basically have an hour-long presentation that explains solar basics. How does it work? How does it attach to your roof? What's the equipment, the warranties? How much does it cost? And so if people get excited and they want to go solar, what they do with us is they sign up on an online sheet. And by signing up, it just means that they're interested in joining that particular group. By the way, if there isn't a group in a state where we work, often people will contact us and say, we'd like to start a group. And we're like, great, you know, organize a meeting. And that's usually how it gets started. Often, if it's with a congregation, it might be this congregation wants to sponsor a group, and we have the meetings at the congregation in the basement or at the school. So you sign up. When you sign up, we evaluate your roof remotely. So I have trained people, have all the solar certifications. They're going to go on Google Earth. They're going to look at your roof. They're going to ask you questions about the materials and the age and the shading. And they're going to give you an initial screening to make sure that you have a good roof. As we get enough people, we hit a critical mass. For us, that's usually around 50 people. But we've done it as small as 5 and as large as 150. So you could do a small bulk purchase with just a few neighbors or a large one. When we get to that point, we issue a request for proposals, and it's open. And part of our kind of the values that we bring to it is we want the process to be open to local companies, to anybody, fair, transparent, and to give the local community control over the process. So we issue the RFP, the bids come in, and we boil the bids down to basically a digest, a spreadsheet that any layperson could understand. And then members of the group join the bid selection committee, and anybody can join. You just raise your hand and you're in. And I always joke at the info sessions that there's sort of two kinds of people that join the co-op. They're the people that just want it to get done and they don't want to make any decisions and they want someone to just guide them through it. And the people that want to get into the details. And those are the people that join the bid selection committee. So the bid selection committee, we don't vote. The bid selection committee is members of the group, it's members of the community, and they evaluate the bids. And they're going to evaluate on the criteria and the values that are from that. So in some cases, people are like, we want the least expensive. In other cases, people are like, we don't want the least expensive. We want a company that's got a long-term commitment to our community, or that's hiring or training locally, or that use American-made products. So it really depends on the community's values. They can impact we poll people generally first, and that can impact the weight of like the RFP process. But really, it's the bid selection committee that really asserts those values and says, this is what's really important to us. And what we do as sort of the technical specialists is help them make sure that they're making technically sound, good decisions based on the track records of the company, that it's high quality equipment, right warranties, the right reasonable price. So usually then one company is chosen to be the installer for the whole group. And then that company starts reaching out to the individual homeowners in the group. And they go make appointments, and then it becomes much more of a bilateral thing. They have guaranteed like a base price to everybody in the co-op. So you get a sort of an equity and fairness, because they're not allowed to pick and choose and say, well, you get that price or you get that price. Everybody gets the base price. But if you want an upgrade of some sort, like you want batteries, or you want a EV charger, or you want special high density panels or black panels or something that looks cool, they can make those changes and then it's an upcharge. Each person gets an individualized proposal that's based on their energy usage and their roof. And so it's going to optimize the actual amount of space they have available, either in their roof or their yard, and offset their electric usage and whatever local policy issues to take into account. And then the person has a month to decide. So that's when you have a critical decision. And then you evaluate the proposal and you decide yes or no. And then you sign. It's a bilateral contract between you and the installer, but based on all the obligations the installer has made to us as the co-op managers for, timely, attention and service and all the things that we do as a group to interject if there's permitting problems or anything. That's where the collective work comes in. So that's basically the process. And then I think for us, what's really important, people get their installs. And at the end, we do a party. And then the party is really to celebrate sort of, again, the values of the group, to spread the gospel, if you let me use that word, and of solar, and maybe spread it onto another group or tell our neighbors about it, maybe invite our local elected officials to the party so they can see how much the community cares. People bring their bill and they show how much money they saved off their first bill after they got solar. So there's a lot of happiness and celebration at those parties. And so that's the basic process and cycle that we go through. And you'll see around the country, there's many sort of cities run something called a Solarize program, which is simple. It's very similar. It has less community control, which I say would be the biggest difference between our approach and the Solarize, which is usually sort of controlled and managed by the city.
Thank you for that great answer. Our next question in the Q&A lineup here is, we have a city-owned utility and Ohio law allows them to block us from selling electricity back to the grid. What would you recommend we do to take full advantage of solar?
Yeah, I would have to look at the specifics. The answer is different in different places, and it's actually, honestly, it's different depending on your usage of electricity. And this is what makes this still a complicated subject area. So if you are a person that has people home during the day and people are using electricity during the day, you might not really need that sellback because you might be just using your production during the day. And so you'll still lower your bill by the amount you used off site. It's just you're not going to have those rollover credits that I was talking over in the beginning, the net metering credits. If you're not somebody who's, oh, maybe everybody's at work during the day and the house is shut down and you're not using electricity, then the rollover credits or the net metering credits are key to you getting the value of solar. And in that case, if your utility is blocking it, you got two choices. It's either fight the utility, which is one of the things we help organize people to do, and we've had many successes getting the utilities to change the policy, and or add storage. So if the utility is not playing ball, you can have backup power. And one of the things about grid-tied solar, which is what we've been talking about, solar where you're connected to the grid, is that when the grid goes down, normally your solar doesn't work anymore because they don't want the solar panels to backfeed into the grid. So it doesn't work for backup power if there's an outage. And so if you have storage on site, if the grid goes down, then your panels charge your battery and you can keep going even through power outages. So that's one of the reasons this bad utility policy and then having backup power and the fact that the storage, the backup battery, the prices are dropping so fast that more and more people are saying, yeah, just give me a couple power walls or give me storage in my basement and I don't need to worry. So there's a couple different paths there. I know that was a complicated answer, but those are the basics.
You're clearly an expert on this.
Absolutely. And excited about it as well.
Yeah.
Ian asked, what would you suggest as the most effective thing a group representing multiple churches in an extended area across countries could do?
Multiple churches in multiple states. I think, I think getting some of the basic info out. I know there's some very good guides for solar for churches. We have guides and resources on it. And there's also some very good guides for solar for schools. And it's basically the exact same set of issues because schools are also usually nonprofits. They also have complicated roofs, which are the two distinguishing features that churches and schools makes it more difficult. So I would say a resource guide. I think that we're in the process of developing this help desk or consulting service. So that's something if people were interested in potentially partnering on, we could do that. And then groups like the two I mentioned in the beginning, Revolve and Collective Sun, that can really make a shortcut on the financial side for people where they don't have to reinvent third-party ownership and they can just go to one of these two really great groups and figure it out themselves.
Gotcha. I think, Anya, what Ian was speaking of, in the UCC, we have conferences. And so you may have a conference that's in the same state, but that it covers the whole state. So you have different churches in different counties.
Yeah.
Would you suggest the same advice in that instance as well?
I know of some organizations that have done bulk church purchases for congregations, which is one option. But I think what I would do is do it in, like, if you say you have a network in one state, you have a lot in common because at least you have one set of state rules. And what I would do is get one or two congregations to go first, either going solar or doing a bulk purchase for their congregation, and then create like a learning chain where then they can go from one or two to the next. I think that it's too heavy of a lift to get a whole bunch of congregations to go solar as a group, because everybody has their own, every congregation has their own timeline. You know, when's the roof need to be replaced, or when is our new capital campaign, or when is the building committee meet? You know, there's all these, you know, different things. And so I think that sort of thinking of a chain reaction where you set up a couple of leads, get them to go, and then share and have them keep expanding out would be the model that I'd recommend. And if it's in a state where we have a program, we can help. If it's not, we can help connect to local experts happily.
Great. The next question we have comes from David Thornton. Do most contractors offer a guarantee on the solar electric system performance?
They do. They do. Most contractors offer a 20-year sort of production warranty. So there's almost nothing you can buy that would give you a production warranty for that many years, for 20 years. And the challenge, I'm going to tell you the downside, because I'm a consumer protection advocate, not just a solar advocate. So those projections are conservative. They usually assume a 2% decrease in production a year in terms of the quality. They tend to be highly accurate. We have all these homeowners after 5 years, after 10 years, they write in, they're like, the projections were right on, they were spot on, or they were a little low. The problem is if it doesn't work out, like there's an equipment failure of some sort, the industry is very fluid. So many of even though it's a 20-year manufacturer's warranty, I don't think many of the companies will be around for 20 years. So they have the confidence in their equipment. It's been tested and tested. It's a very solid and uncomplicated piece of equipment. It's not like solar thermal was, solar hot water was years ago, which had all these moving parts and they were always breaking. The nice thing about photovoltaics is there's no moving parts. Once if the panel you get works, it very rarely breaks. And the warranties are great. The problem is that the industry is in a lot of flux. And so the likelihood in 15 years of your same installer or your same manufacturer still being around is not that high.
All right, interesting.
That's the word of warning there.
Right. Couple more questions here. Let's see. I think you did mention that there are some co-ops that are made up of only churches. Is that correct? You've experienced that?
Yeah.
But it can be left, right?
Yeah, we did a couple many years ago in DC, and there is a group called the Community Purchasing Alliance, which if you guys don't know, it's a really neat model, and they're in they're expanding the number of states. So they started in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, I think. And they do aggregate purchasing for churches for all sorts of things. So trash pickup, photocopiers, the energy procurement issue we were talking about before, who's your energy supplier? And they've also done solar. So they've done, sort of specialized in that. So I think that for us, it's a lot of, you need to have strong leadership from the churches for that to work. So if you have a group of churches and they're really sure and there's strong leadership, that totally will work. The problem we've run into is that often the process got started because, say, one member of the congregation is into it, but they don't really have the backing or support of the decision makers at their congregation. And then it gets very bogged down because of the process of building a consensus or whatever the decision-making process is. And each kind of denomination and each congregation have a different decision-making process. So figuring out who you need to get to say yes can be very complicated if you're not really inside. Does that make sense? I bet it does make sense.
Yes, helpful, very helpful. We've had a couple of questions about solar shingles. Are they a viable option? How do they compare with solar panels? Thoughts on that?
So far, not a viable option. Everybody loves the idea. Everybody's like, when are we going to have solar shingles? We love the idea. They're not really ready for prime time. They're not really in production. There was just an announcement, I think a month ago, that Tesla re-announced that they were going to make them, but they're not really available on the market. And there was an effort, I think Corning did some about 10 years ago, and it didn't make it. So I expect there will be solar shingles sometime, but it's not really a viable option. And the only thing I would add to that is that solar being up above your roof actually does a lot to preserve your roof. So even though the solar shingles could be a much more elegant looking, depending on the type of building, we're seeing really phenomenal statistics about the amount of cooling a building gets by just having the panels above the roof, and about the additional years of life your roof gets by having less sun and wind and rain directly on the roof. So the panels do have a lot of benefit by not being shingles, because they're basically creating a protection for your building. That being said, I imagine once shingles really take off, people will get it will be adopted very quickly, but they're not cost effective yet.
Right.
Not even close.
Good. Thanks for sharing that. I have a question for you, kind of just something for you to tell us about. From what I've witnessed in the state of Ohio that I thought was really wonderful is it seems like, people get involved in a co-op, they generate all this energy and enthusiasm, they get the solar installed, but then what your organization appears to do, correct me if I'm wrong, is then you engage them in advocacy needs at the state level should they arise or when they arise. And so I was just wondering if you could say something about that, about how it kind of goes beyond just the purchasing, but there's kind of this realizing, that there's sometimes more to be done.
Sure, I really appreciate that question, because it's really central to how we look at this issue. Our theory of change, or our sort of internal operating mechanism, is go solar, join together, fight for your energy rights. And we see those three as being inextricably linked. A lot of times we start with go solar because that's when people come to us and they're like, we want solar. And we're like, great. So we start there. Somebody mentioned in the comments about their utility that doesn't allow buyback. So what we're seeing is a well-funded national campaign to try to stop rooftop solar through all sorts of policies. And the utilities are threatened by rooftop solar because they've done the numbers. They know people can actually make their own clean local energy cheaper and better quality than what they buy from the utility. That's possible today. There's some transaction costs that are real, but the fact is that once you get the solar, you're making your own energy less expensively with better quality than what you get from the utility. And if you add storage, with more resiliency, right? With better backup power and security. So the utilities, funded by many outside sources and oil and gas interests, are putting all sorts of policy blocks in the way, which is fixed charges and minimum charges and no buyback and no net metering and all sorts of things. So there's a constant churn of this pushback. And so we really need people to stay engaged so that not only they can go solar, but those coming after them can go solar. The other part of our theory of this cycle is that we want solar to be affordable and accessible for everyone. We started in the market rate, middle class, not wealthy, not poor, but people who had houses. But we want there to be community solar or shared solar for people who rent or in apartment buildings, for people who have shady roofs. So we want it available for everyone. And as you going into, and for people that don't have money, or people who are struggling to decide whether to pay their electricity bill or buy food, we don't want that to be a decision anymore. And we think that that this cycle, every time you go through that cycle of go solar, join together and fight for your rights, you're expanding and diversifying the number and type of people that can participate in solar. So you might start with the roof, and you do a few cycles of that, and you're building strength. You've got homeowners, you're all over the state. And then you're like community solar, and then you're adding in renters and apartment dealers. Then you're adding in low income solar or municipal solar or nonprofit solar. So every cycle, you're bringing in more and more people. That's local jobs. You're not exporting the money out of your community. It's clean local power. So that cycle, we think, is a virtuous cycle that builds power over time. And so we really try hard to connect people any part of the way, you know, and they can do it any way they want. Like some people like the politics, but some people are more like, show me the money, I want the tangible stuff. So we're running a national solar home tour that anybody can participate, where you basically just open your house one day a year and invite people in and show them your solar. So it could be you're a solar ambassador, participate in the tour, or you're testifying, or you're writing a letter to the editor, or you're going and lobbying your legislators. So a whole suite of activities. And we try to make it so that anybody can participate at the level that they're comfortable with. But we're not going to make it unless we keep building.
Great, thank you. We're running short on time, so I'm going to maybe try to combine two for the last question we'll consider here. We've got one question that's kind of about they both relate to kind of the maintenance, right? It's like there's leaves, crud, wearing and tear on either shingles or panels. And then there's also kind of the need to maybe upgrade the structural capability of the roof, you know, with the addition of panels, you know, how often does one need to do kind of upgrades to the roof, or what does that all entail? So any things you want to say about just maintenance issues?
Sure, it really depends on how your solar is attached. So, because in a slanty roof, the solar is attached flush to your roof and with silicone seals, and you're not really going to get stuff behind it. Where I live, we have a flat roof, and people tend to put beams, and then the panels are up above the roof. So that, and in some cases where there's slants, what people do is they put essentially screens around the panels, between the panels and the roof, or they call them guards or something. There's technical words for them. So that not only can no leaves get in there, but no squirrels and stuff like that. So it really just depends. There's a lot of solutions for that. If you have to replace your roof, you do have to take the solar panel system off generally. And there are some installers that will give you a one free reinstall, knowing that the panels essentially last 25 years. And if you think you've got 10 years on your roof, they'll say, we'll come back once for free. You got to negotiate for that. So that's an example of something we might push hard for as a group purchase to get into the contract. But it's not, we are now at the age, because we've been doing this for 10 years, that a lot of the people that we helped in the beginning are grappling with this. Some of the companies have gone out of business, or they didn't have that. And it's not that complicated. Essentially, they unscrew the panels, they put them down, they do your roof, and then you got to get a professional rewire. The roofer can re-put them back on, and then you need a professional to make sure that the wiring's done. It's not that much additional cost. So far, it doesn't seem like it's a big problem.
All right, maybe we can squeeze in one last question. I see ads for solar with no out-of-pocket cost. What should I watch for? Why should I do a co-op instead? Is this really a matter of where the cost comes? Like maybe you're going to be paying more later?
Yeah, it's a great question. So those no-cost solar, what I was talking about is the same thing as third-party solar or a power purchase agreement. It means somebody else owns the solar. And we actually have a lot of detail. We have a guide that's, what if I sell my solar home, that describes about what you should watch out for. But typically there's a few things you need to watch out for. One, you really need to understand the solar fundamental economics to know whether it's a good deal or a bad deal. In most markets where we work, it's usually a better deal to borrow the money. If you have a way to borrow the money, and then get all the benefits yourself. But it depends, and it depends on your risk. The thing you need to look out for is the details of the contract. Many of those contracts have escalators, which means they say, no money down, you buy your solar electricity from us when you produce it, and say you're paying, 12 cents the utility, you only pay us 10 cents. Sounds great. I'm saying 2 cents a kilowatt hour, no money out of pocket. But the fine print is that what you're paying keeps going up every year at a very high rate. So you have to look for that. And then the other main thing to look out for in those kind of contracts is what happens if you sell the home, because there is essentially a lien on your home, and you either have to get the new buyer to buy out that contract, or you have to buy it out in order to sell it. So those are the two main things. Or I guess it's three things. One, really understand the basic economics enough to know whether it's a good deal. Because a lot of times they don't tell you, well, you can get a 30% tax credit, you can get these local incentives. They keep all that when they own it, right? So understand the solar economic basics first. Look at the fine print on the contract, and then think carefully about the buyout provisions. How long are you going to be in the home?
Great, great. Well, we always like to conclude with reflections on a closing call to action. Michael, do you have any thoughts before we get some thoughts from Anya? She's given us lots of actions throughout this call.
Absolutely. I think Anya has given us a great starting point as those who lead congregations as well as lead in communities of faith. Here's my call to action to you all. Again, as I always say, get involved. This is an easy solution that we can push as congregations, as associations, as well as conferences. This is a great remedy to some of our ailing issues in society, but it's also a way of showing, again, those regenerative relationships. The sun gives us enough energy that we don't have to kill ourselves getting it. And this is a regenerative relationship. But it's also a regenerative relationship when you look at your own congregation and the fact that your congregations give and give and give. And we at some point as a body of believers and whatever we might believe in, have to give back to our communities that we serve. This is a great way of leading the way and giving back to those communities. So again, my call to actions for you all leaving this call is to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for that closing call to action. Anya, anything you would like to conclude with to get us active and involved?
No, it was an honor being invited to talk to you guys. And you can, my email is anya@solarunitedneighbors.org, and we're happy to share whatever we've got and support you in your journey. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Anya, for this wonderful webinar. I really appreciate how you not only know about solar, but you know how to work with people and you know the dynamics of that, right? And so that I think is really critical for us who work in congregations. And so thank you so much for all those insights that you brought to this. I really liked one of the things you said about congregations being kind of, starting a chain reaction. We can do something and we can teach others to do it. And I feel like that really kind of represents kind of the, what we try to do in these webinars, and so really excited that you were with us today. For those of you on the call, know we'll be back again next month. We are excited that we lined up a theologian for next month who has just come out with a book on activist theology. Robin Henderson Espinoza will be with us next month, and she'll be talking about what's in her new book and really relating that to environmental justice and climate justice. Very excited to have her. And so thanks again, everyone. I'll be in touch with everybody via email. We'll have a YouTube link of this recorded webinar, as well as some of the links that were mentioned in this webinar. So thanks again,
Thank you all.
and God bless.
Take care.
Thank you, Anya.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.